Is it time for a mind shift? If you don't know what that means, then join your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Christian pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years, along the journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of faith, life, religion, and spirituality.
I'm here with Gerette and Lisa of igotout.org. Thank you so much, ladies, for dropping into Mindshift Podcast.
Oh, it's a delight.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk to both of you because obviously I've seen you. I think we met up on Twitter is where we first started kind of interacting with each other. Then I checked out your site and I thought, okay, this is something that I can certainly get behind because talking about leaving religion, telling your stories, I mean, it's just an amazing thing, and I'm sure we'll get into the actual site and what it's all about maybe a bit later on. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, since we've never met before, we've talked a little bit before we hit record, but who wants to go first? So we talked about, okay, sharing our stories. Maybe we can kind of introduce ourselves to the listeners. I don't know who wants to go first, but if you're interested to kind of tell your story and how you got here, that might be a good place to start.
Go for it, Lisa.
So, yeah, I got out of a small New Age self-help group 5 years ago, January 1st, 2016. And when I left my group, my thinking is I never wanted to have anything to do with therapy or cults or spirituality or anything ever again. And I set about to creating my new life. I was in for 30 years. The group that I was in was, like I said, a small New Age group. When I first got in at 19 years old, the leader was teaching a lot of classes. And these were nutrition classes, breath work classes. A lot of his work centered around what's called rebirthing, which is about processing your birth trauma to have a more healthy, creative, fulfilling life, to get over whatever. We used affirmations, affirmations, meditation. He taught massage classes, prosperity classes, relationship classes. So all of these things, and there was a lot of people at the time when we got started, probably 40 people at a time would show up for these classes. And that went on for about a year. And then he decided to form a support group, which was a group of dedicated people who wanted to put more effort into the new way of living that we were creating. And I was at 19 years old when I met him. I was a single mom without a high school education. I dropped out early because I got pregnant and a whole lot of other history before that. Mm-hmm. But at any rate, I ended up staying through many changes that happened in the group over that time. And the group and his work became more insular and smaller. He stopped teaching classes. We became the support group and we started investing in properties and doing a lot of travel. And I think now that I'm away from it, I think that he's a very smart man. He was able to observe a lot of the New Age communities that were popping up at the late 80s and 90s. And where they were making their mistakes and having trouble, he wanted to just kind of make his shtick very small. Mm-hmm. By the time I left with the man that I had brought in 10 years earlier, we split. And when we left with basically just ourselves. I left everything at the group, everything that I had invested in the group. And yeah, we left behind maybe 4 people plus the leader.
So it was a very, very small group.
now there's just a few true believer people that have made it their lives, which is where I was at, and now I'm not.
Right. So would you say, now looking back on it, was it a cult in sort of the classical sense of the word? Would you describe it as such?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
What would make it a cult in your point of view now?
Well, all of the controls that were in place in my life. I had no other life besides the group.
Right. It was all consuming, sort of
It was all consuming.
undue influence sort of model.
Well, I was unable to, all through the time that I was there, we would, of course, have people from the outside view us and say things about us being a cult. No, we're just an intentional community of people living a new lifestyle, and you don't know what you're talking about. Before I left, there were a few incidences that kind of created cracks. And I don't remember what my search was, but I found the term on the internet, high demand group. I came across an article from Colleen Russell and read this article probably at least half a dozen times as I'm starting to just kind of grasp the concept that high demand group and cult are the same thing. Just one's a more alarming word and another one was a little more approachable. And once I was able to embrace those three words, high demand group, and look at how my life is run by this man.
It hit all the markers, basically, huh?
It was like, okay, yeah.
I might be in a cult.
I might be in a cult. And
that's certainly one of the markers, isn't it? I can't remember who said it. Might be Dr. Janja Lalich in her book, Take Back Your Life. But she says that when other people call your group a cult, that might be a sign that, wait a minute. And if you're defending, we're not a cult, as you say, right. Other people are groups are cults. We're not a cult. There's no question about it.
No, I can go through, I loved her book. It was one of the ones that really helped me. But I can go through Stephen Hassan's BITE model and check all the boxes.
Yeah, I was going to say that's another classic one, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So true. So you got out of a cult. So you're trying to now essentially rebuild your identity. Is that kind of the journey you're on post this group?
Right. So Clint, one of the things that happened when I got out is I realized as a 19-year-old with no skills going into this group, over the years, I took on more and more responsibility in the house, and I did all the food prep, or a large majority of the food, the inventory, the housekeeping, all of these things. I had a cleaning business when I met him, but my work really centered around those types of domestic
the housekeeping and all the rest of it.
Things. Yeah. And so, and any time that I wanted to learn something else or venture out of that lane, I was shut down. It was really important that my life stayed in its little compartment. So when I got out, all of a sudden it's like, what the hell am I going to do with myself? And
you've invested all these years doing the same thing, basically, isn't it? You got no other marketable skills. That's a classic cult thing too, isn't it? You get out after X number of years and you've got no true job skills to land work other than what you did for the cult.
Right. So, inside the group, I was able to develop my photography skills kind of on the sneak. And so I am a photographer. And since I got out, I started building websites and learning through Squarespace how to build a website. And so igotout.org is probably the 6th or 7th website that I've built. Yeah, it's just been awesome to get to learn all these new things.
A whole new life. That is an amazing story. I'm sure we'll come back and touch base on where you're at now. But now, what about Gerette? What's your story?
I was in a new agey kind of self-help group for 18 years. And through that time, I was, I had a child, I was married, I had two kids were born, and I ran a business, I worked as a teacher. So one of the things that was really interesting for me when I got out, which was, I got out 7 years ago, I kind of like looked around me and thought, occasionally I had heard that word cult, while I was in there for those 18 years. But our teacher, the head guy, would occasionally say, yeah, some people think we're a cult, but we can't be, because people are free to come and go as they want. And it was true. Mm-hmm. People came and left all the time. So when I got out, I'm like looking at, these different models, and I knew that I was in a cultic environment because of what happened to me and my mind and my consciousness and how it shifted when I got out. And I realized that a lot of the techniques that were used in the past have been morphed to just be a little more socially acceptable and look like they're not cultic. So for example, the open door policy, yes, we knew that people could be, members of the group or not. And at any, you could say, yeah, hey, I'm done, I'm leaving. And it was like, yeah, goodbye, no problem. But there was this underlying, we knew that everybody who left, either if they didn't come back, they were missing out on the goods big time. Mm-hmm. We also knew there was a lot of talking about each other in between. In fact, a lot of the work in the group I was in was based around dreams. And so the head analyst guy would talk about each other's dreams all the time. So there was like, and I thought that was kind of cool. Like we knew each other, we were an open, we were open books,
Just an open book.
But that was, another form of manipulation, because there was always, he always had these, these cards that he could pull out of his back pocket, and he would know our vulnerabilities as well.
Kind of like collateral in a way, similar to what NXIVM. Yeah, NXIVM had maybe more extreme, didn't it? But they had, the women of NXIVM had the collateral that they were supposed to confess their deepest, darkest secrets. And then Keith Raniere could pull those out at any point, or they thought he could, and, go public with them. And then they'd be shamed and all the rest of it. So they could never talk about it or leave the group.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that the leader of my group would do, number one, we were heavily invested. All of any money that we had in our life went into our properties and his
plow
stuff.
Back into the group.
Right. So you never had your own thing. Also, whenever anybody left, they were always trash talked.
Mm-hmm.
They were always, and so a big thing that kept me in was watching people leave and, they broke their commitment. They don't, they didn't keep up their end of the bargain.
Right. Weren't dedicated enough to stay.
Losers.
Losers.
Right. And so they were always made to look like weak or bad. And I did not want to be a bad person. Mm-hmm. That was one of the biggest things that kept me locked in.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, something going back to Janja Lalich, isn't it? That's what she calls that self-sealing system, where there's never any good reason to leave. There's no good reason. You should never leave. Why would anyone want to leave? And then when they are left, they're made an example of, to some various extent or another, that dispensing of existence. You no longer have the right to exist, so we can do whatever we want. We can shun you. We can, to various levels, isn't it?
Yeah, although, what's interesting, Clint, is in the group that I was in, and I have come up with the term an everyday cult to describe the group that I was in. It actually, there were good reasons to leave. And if it tied in with your inner work, that you were, kind of guided to take a break, to focus on something else. Like there actually were some really good reasons to leave. And yet there was an overarching, if you left, you weren't really leaving. So
you might come back.
Yeah, there was like the illusion of leaving. Like I left twice in my group, before, finally snapping out. And they were for valid reasons. And I feel like that's part of what has happened. And it's kind of, to me, a really concerning aspect of what's happening in the psyche of people today is that, there's a system that we buy into that we can believe in, but actually not know it, not know that it's something that we have, dedicated our lives to, because there's like this overt authoritarian ideals that have been, I think, weakening our capacity for critical thinking, our capacity for discernment.
Mm-hmm.
I was a teacher. At that point, I was an elementary and high school, a special educator and an elementary school teacher when I first started with this, I've, college educated.
You're educated.
Person,
yeah.
How the hell did this happen?
But they say cults tend to actually go for more highly educated people, isn't it? That's a common misconception too.
Yes.
That, only dumb people, stupid people would, fall victim to a cult. That's not the case. Again, going back to Nexium, so many of its people were PhDs and master's degrees, and they went after successful, motivated people who had already made a success of themselves in life, just wanted to go to the next level or whatever it was.
Yeah. And, I had mentioned before you started recording, the book Snapping.
Right. Conway
So I got to show you something. Okay. And I know that listeners can't see this, but I'm showing you a copy of the book Snapping. And if you look at it, it is like, aged and falling apart. Well, this book sat on my bookshelf the entire time I was in the friggin' cult. The entire
never read
time.
It?
My husband had read it. He was in the same group with me for 16 of the 18 years I was in. He had read it before I went in. I knew it was on the shelf. Maybe I even took it off occasionally, but it was, when I got out, it was a very, the way that Conway and Siegelman talk about snapping when you go into a cult, I very much had that experience leaving. So when I left, like literally through this profound awakening process where I was in a meeting, there was a crisis in the organization. We were able to have one last meeting with what was called the executive committee, which is supposed to be the decision-making organization of the larger organization. Truth is, it wasn't until after I got out that I could see that we didn't make a damn decision. Every decision was made by 3 tiers that were ahead of this 25-member, 24-member, executive committee. But at any rate, we had 6 of the main teachers left all at one time in one day. And the next day, we were kind of given the opportunity to have our last scheduled executive committee meeting with those 6 teachers. And this is so true. It's going to sound like a tale, but it really is what happened.
You're not making it up.
I'm not making this up. You can't make this shit up, right?
You can't make this shit up. That's true. Well, you could, but truth is stranger than fiction. It really is.
Right. Exactly.
So true.
So
My God.
In the last 5 minutes of that meeting, one person finally said something that changed everything. I couldn't understand, why were these people leaving? Why are they leaving altogether? We're family. We're were, like, how could this possibly be happening? And she described a situation of being berated for hours at a time by the head leader. And this was a really gentle-souled person. And I knew unequivocally she was telling the truth. And that truth, that the leader that I had put up on a pedestal could berate her for hours at a time, did not jive with what I knew now to be true. So like that experience created the crack.
The cognitive dissonance.
It was I didn't know that term, cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's another one, isn't it?
But it was cognitive dissonance is what let in, the light, the way, Leonard Cohen's, the crack that lets in the light. That was my crack. And it takes me about 45 minutes to drive home from where this meeting was. That was the last 5 minutes of the meeting. By the time I got home, I was out. And I stood in my driveway. I read about this in my book. I stood in my driveway and my life, I was in a completely different reality. And I went inside, woke up my husband and told him, and he was like, I've been waiting for this.
Welcome finally, huh?
Exactly. He's like,
finally.
It was like 2 years. And his capacity to stay quiet and stay with me was just, he's a gorgeous human being.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It is totally amazing. And without that, we would have absolutely been divorced. If he had pushed me, I would have left
out of there.
The group was more important.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me, you mentioned Lisa Stephen Hassan's bite model, something he said that when he was being deprogrammed, I guess you could say, when he broke his leg, he had an accident, broke his leg, and his father kind of, I wouldn't say kidnapped him, but deprogrammed him. Yeah. And he said, I remember him saying that it was when he saw a clip of Reverend Moon preaching a sermon or giving a talk somewhere that he knew was demonstrably false, because he obviously met Moon on many, many occasions. And that was kind of that same moment was when he realized that the man was a liar.
Right.
And he's like, oh my God, this guy, I've put him up on a pedestal uncritically for 2.5, 3 years. Yeah. And that was when the scales sort of fell from his eyes. And it was like, I've got to get out of this thing.
Right. That was Steve Hassan's crack.
Yeah. When we return from the break with this conversation with Lisa and Gerette from igotout.org, we're going to get more into this issue of some of the cult psychology and specifically some of the resources that are available if you are getting out or you've just gotten out of whatever religious background you're coming out of or any sort of high control group. It doesn't actually have to be a religion. You need to rebuild your life. You need to rebuild your identity, reclaim your authentic self. And Gerette and Lisa are going to give you not only some practical tips as to what sorts of resources are available, they're going to show you how you can share your story on the I Got Out website. And Lisa's going to give us some really practical tips on how you can get involved as an activist in this I Got Out movement. And in fact, she sent me just a few hours ago, as I'm doing this recording now, Lisa sent me an email and it's got a really good statement about the igotout.org website. I wanted to read it to you. The statement reads as follows: if you have been in any culty, high control group or religion, share your story with the hashtag #IGotOut. Share on your own platform, or if you need to be anonymous and or would like support, there are resources at the igotout.org website. When you see a survivor share their story, let them know that they have been heard. This is such a meaningful part of the movement. We all need to know we're not alone. If you know someone who has been harmed by a high demand group, share hashtag #IGotOut post you think might help them. Together, it concludes, we can bring awareness to how many of us have been harmed by high control organizations and end the shame or stigma that we might feel about our experiences. Tell your story, impact lives, change the world. Find out more at igotout.org. And that is exactly why I've titled this episode, Tell Your Story and Change the World, because I love that tagline of their website, and I love the work that Lisa and Gerette are doing. And in fact, speaking of these two ladies, we have confirmed that we are going to be having them come in as our guests on the 23rd of May, 2021 for our next Mindshift Zoom call next month. And in fact, speaking of which, we've got this month on the 25th of April, we've got Fred Clarkson. He's going to be coming in as our guest. He was just on the show a few episodes ago. And so I'm really excited to be welcoming Fred back in this time as our guest. How can you get access to these monthly calls that we do? Sometimes we do 2 calls a month, as well as our patrons only call, which in fact, as I'm doing this recording, this month's patrons only call is tonight on the 18th of April. We do these also once a month, usually the first or second weekend of the month. And so access to the calls is available by supporting the show on Patreon. And in fact, speaking of which, I wanted to give a huge thank you to a couple of people. Thank you to Rebecca Mon. She actually upped her pledge from $1 a month to $5 a month. So I'm going to be sending her a nice little gift here from North Wales. And then Ava Munson went up from $1 a month to $10 a month. So when she sends me her address, this is a good reminder for Ava to send me your address, and I will send you a nice free Mindshift Podcast t-shirt for your support of the show. It's really hugely appreciated, and it helps me meet my monthly expenses to keep the show coming every month. Now, before we get back into the chat with Lisa and Gerette, I wanted to talk about what's coming up in the next episode here. This one, of course, is another bonus episode. I've got a lot of content in the queue. But the next episode that we're going to drop next Friday is a conversation I had a while ago with Andrew Jasko, and I've been promising this is coming, but it is in the pipeline. We talked about healing religious trauma syndrome and PTSD through psychedelics. And in fact, if you want a little bit of a sneak preview, you can head over to the Mindshift Podcast Facebook page where I have posted the call that we had with Andrew Jasko last month. We actually had 2 calls on RTS. We had Thomas Hanna the week before, and then we had Andrew Jasko. We kind of were focusing on religious trauma syndrome last month. And so that call is available. You can watch it. It's a great call with Andrew. It kind of get into a little bit of the psychedelics at the end, but I didn't want to give too much away because this episode had not dropped at that point. So it'll be coming out soon. So look for that one with Andrew Jasko. All right, let's get back into the chat with Lisa and Gerette as we continue to look at this issue of how telling your story about how you got out of whatever high control religion, whatever group or background you came out of, how you can actually change the world. And they're going to offer up practical tips and advice as to how you can get involved and make not just your story, but that of all kinds of other people's heard as well.
No, for sure. It's a profound moment. And I know for a lot of people, it can be, much more gradual. When I got out as an educator, I just dove in to studying cults and cult dynamics and mind control, and really the whole process of how we can get there. One of the
how does it happen?
How does it happen? And, the work of Dan Siegel was real. Do you know his work?
No, I haven't come across it.
Yeah, that was one of my, in addition to Flo Conway and Jim Siegelman, there were 2 other really important sources for me. And one of them was the book, do you know Thinking Fast and Slow?
No, I haven't come across it.
Kahneman? Oh,
No.
God. I think
now you've got all these books I need to read.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's all about basically how you think, and, it goes into, a lot of, how to develop critical thinking and why it is that we're not critical thinkers, that humans are not naturally critical thinkers. And the other was Daniel Siegel, Dr. Daniel Siegel, who is a neuroscientist. And his work I found fascinating because he was he had focused on trauma, but he also talked about the importance of creating what he calls a coherent narrative. And that process of when we've gone through a traumatic experience, to be able to tell and retell our story so that we actually are creating it and can make sense of, the cognitive dissonance moments, or like how we could, be in that particular experience. And it was his work that really prompted me to just be so committed to the power of telling one's story.
That narrative, yeah, it's huge, isn't it?
It's huge.
Well, and I think too, when you share your story and other people hear it and they say, my God, I'm not the only one who's going through this. I'm not crazy. Right. This is telling my story too. It gives language to our own experiences, doesn't it? That's what I found coming out of evangelicalism, kind of fundamentalist Bible cult background that I came out of growing up. I thought, I guess I was the only one, and I found that, no, that's not the case. There are many, many people. And even though the two of you come out of a New Age kind of background, we have a lot in common, even though I was raised in fundamentalist evangelical Christianity, which on paper shouldn't be, as it would seem. Christianity has nothing in common with New Age, but yet the cult psychology is what I think ties it together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And how often do you hear ex-evangelicals say, I got out?
Yeah, there's a huge movement.
Phrase? Do they use that phrase? That's my question.
Oh, it's a question. I thought you were saying it was a statement. It's a funny thing because as we knew in evangelicalism, just like you were saying, Lisa, we're not a cult. Everybody else is cults. I can remember I used to be sort of a specialist in apologetics, what they call apologetics, which is defending the faith, the Christian faith. And I studied, I read books and I was a teacher and everything else. And I remember reading one book by a guy that I really idolized, the book called The Kingdom of the Cults. And it was all about how all the other groups are cults, Mormons are cults, Jehovah's Witnesses are cults, New Age is a cult, and Christianity's the truth. We've got the truth. And so we need to make sure they know that they're wrong and we're right. And that was what apologetics was, from that point of view. It was only when I admitted to myself that I had been raised in a cult, kind of like your moments of that, the cracks in light coming through. It was like, oh my God, I've got to go on this whole journey of now, like you did, Gerette, reading and talking to people. And I read Robert Lifton's Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. That was a big breakthrough moment for me because I applied what he talked about in brainwashing and cult psychology to my own experience. And that's when I saw, wow, I was raised in a cult.
Wow. That's an amazing, his work is so pivotal.
It really is.
Well, in the history of understanding.
Yeah, one of the first, really, wasn't it, studying, Korean prisoners of war or war prisoners from the Korean War and how they'd been brainwashed. Here's all these American politicians and generals and everybody, freaking out because they're thinking, wait a minute, they could do that to Americans. They could do that to anybody. And yet the cults have taken those principles. As you were saying earlier, Lisa, I mean, that's one of the things I think a lot of people may not understand is that cult leaders and cult groups are actually studying the literature too. They're getting more and more sophisticated. I just finished reading Stephen Hassan's The Cult of Trump, and he goes into a lot more stuff other than just the Trump phenomenon. Obviously, I don't know if you've read it, but he talks about how groups now can recruit using, YouTube and social media. You don't have to even be in the same physical location. They could be in a completely different country, and you could still find yourself in a group with undue influence or a cultic group by social media or the internet.
Totally. Have you heard of the podcast, The Gateway?
I haven't, no.
So I finished listening to that last week. It's like a 6-part series about an Instagram influencer named Teal Swan. Mm-hmm. You heard that name?
I've heard of that name, yes.
Yeah, it was pretty riveting. I was pretty blown away. But yeah, I mean, she's accumulating all these people following her through her Instagram feed and her YouTubes. It's pretty dangerous stuff.
Well, we've seen it with QAnon as well.
Well, exactly. And that was what I was going to say with QAnon, and Gerette talked about her getting out and that snap, that thing. QAnon and the collision of the pandemic and the anti-vaxxers and all of this stuff, what happened last year, this time of year, is my daughter, who I raised in the group that I was in, she left right before her 18th birthday. And I stayed for like 10 years after that. Our relationship has been extremely challenged. And, we've gone along and we've tried to have a relationship based basically on my taking care of the kids, her 2 children, but in supporting her as she's navigated some life changes. But the thing that kind of brought me into doing this work with I Got Out was her divergence from being able to kind of be on the same page with COVID protocols. Mm-hmm. There was that, and then all of a sudden she's sending me QAnon stuff. And then our relationship basically deteriorated after that.
And
so
she got into QAnon then?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
She's still into it?
I don't know. We haven't talked.
Right. That's just fallen out, unfortunately.
Yeah, we have not had a conversation, really much of anything, for almost a year now. That situation, coupled with my watching The Vow, like I said, when I got out, I didn't want to have anything to do with cults. I was done. I wanted to make a new life. But losing my daughter again to a cult, and then seeing The Vow, really brought home how important this work is. And, like we talked about, my not having a skill set, so to speak, a career. I've got plenty
marketable
of skills.
Yeah.
Marketable skills. I'm sharp. I can learn. Learning, I can learn. But just all of a sudden I was like, you know what? Something's got to happen. And I don't want the 19-year-old me of yesterday to get trapped into any kind of situation like this ever again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, education's hugely important, isn't it? We've all kind of gone down that route. It sounds like
Absolutely.
Reading books and listening to podcasts and talking to other cult survivors. That is hugely important, I think. Yep. One of the biggest pieces, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, and it's the stories, Clint. I mean, really, people learn from each other. And the situation that I describe as my cult of this tight-knit group of people isn't the same as somebody like, Sarah, who is in Nexium, where it's this huge, company.
15,000 people.
Yeah, massive.
Taking courses, yeah.
Which is nothing compared to some of the huge, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons in the millions. Evangelicalism is billions of people all over the world. So, yeah,
but everybody's
small or large.
Everybody is experiencing a lot of the same harm.
Mm-hmm, exactly. The end result can be the same. I mean, I do a lot of stuff on religious trauma syndrome, which is another whole piece as well. You probably experienced some form of RTS in your groups.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another whole piece. You're not only traumatized, and that's what Dr. Marlene Winnell says, you're not only traumatized while you're in the group because of the abuses of various kinds that we may have suffered, but then on the back end, when you leave the group, then you've got to recover and go through all the trauma and perhaps the shunning and you losing family members, losing relationships, being cut off and having no marketable skills, like in your case, Lisa, and you've got to start all over. That's all part of religious trauma syndrome because of the groups that we were in. We, invested so much time, money, energy. My whole adult life was invested in, evangelicalism.
Yeah. And you know what? Layer onto all of that, the shame, the natural shame reaction that we have when we kind of wake up to the fact that, ooh, that which I had devoted so much of my life to was actually not trustworthy.
Not
was
good.
Actually harmful.
Yeah,
was
it's
like
hurting
really,
people.
I would have to say that it was like that realization. If you think of that as like energy, that we're suppressing so much of our kind of life potential.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, our authentic self, for sure, isn't it?
By keeping it quiet.
You have to suppress that.
Yeah. And that, for me, is what fueled my desire for I Got Out. You know, like when I saw what was happening with the Me Too movement, when women were telling their stories, they were saying, this is what happened to me. And that it actually is something that has created some social change. I had a couple of years ago, I had a very wimpy attempt at trying to get a hashtag movement going. And, you know, nothing happened because I'm a nobody. And
You don't have 50,000 followers?
No, and I didn't know what to do. I had not a clue.
We just got Gerette on Instagram like a couple weeks ago.
All right.
So bad.
That's a start. You're going to go viral soon, Gerette.
Yeah.
You're going to blow up the internet. You'll break the internet.
Oh, it's going to happen, right?
Oh, yeah. Especially off the back of this podcast, man. You're going to be huge. Yeah.
But it was really Lisa, you know, the way that we came together. Lisa, I'm wondering if you want to tell that story.
Yeah, I was going to say, we need to hear the story of the I Got Out website for sure in the last little segment here.
Right. So after seeing the vow, I started talking to Sarah Edmondson through Instagram and then email. And within just a few days, my mind was blown with the vow.
Yeah,
and,
I've seen it.
You know, there were just so many similarities between her group and mine. Only mine was a small scale. Within a few days of, you know, short communications with Sarah, she was always very encouraging when I was sharing my big dreams of what we could do. I bought the domain igotout.org and then I followed Stephen Hassan on Twitter and saw him using the hashtag I Got Out.
Can I interject right there?
Sure.
That moment? Because what Lisa didn't know then is that out on the East Coast, a buddy of mine named Mark Laxer and Steve Hassan had started talking about creating a hashtag movement, you know, to help people, you know, to destigmatize, you know, cultic involvement. And we were tossing around all different ideas of, you know, it could be hashtag hoodwinked or hashtag whatever.
Got to be something clever.
Yeah. But then when Steve Hassan's assistant sent an email, how about hashtag I Got Out? And it was like within seconds, everybody emailed back, yes, that's it.
That's perfect.
So it was perfect. And he started using it. And
right away.
Lisa saw it.
Yeah.
Right away, he started using it and I saw him using it. And I was like, oh, well, I can't wait for Sarah to give me an introduction to Steve Hassan. I'm just going to have to call his office myself. And so I did. And I talked to his assistant and I told her I had the domain igotout.org. These are my plans for it. This is what I'm thinking. She says, will you please write that down in an email? Because Steve is meeting with these two other people in a couple hours and I'll make sure he sees it before his meeting. So I wrote down all of my plans and ideas and went to go make lunch, sat down at the table, checked my phone, and Steve had sent an invitation to this meeting with him and Gerette and Mark.
Oh, wow. That was fast.
5 days. 5 days before the sentencing of Keith Raniere. So we got off that call and I got to work making the first igotout.org website.
Yeah.
Because I wanted it to be there for his sentencing. And then we were going to tell the world about I Got Out. Hashtag I Got Out.
Yeah.
It was going to blow up. Well, it's not quite done that, but we're plugging along and more people are using it. I'm seeing the hashtag being picked up on Twitter from lots of random people. Starting to talk to podcasters like yourself that are going to start spreading the word about the hashtag. And that was why I asked you a little bit ago, when you talk to people, do people use that phrase? I got out of.
It's an interesting thing. I've never heard people say that about evangelicalism. And perhaps I would say it's because it's not a monolithic movement. It's not a single group. It's not like it's a cult group like Nexium or Scientology or FLDS or something like that. It's so big, and it's obviously global. Everyone's experience is different, so it's a case, I think, for a lot of ex-evangelicals like myself. I mean, I didn't have a single moment like you've both described where it snapped and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in a cult, I got to get out. It was a long process of deconstructing. It took, many, many years of finally realizing I didn't believe the theology anymore. And that was a big problem because I was still teaching at a Bible college, whoops, we got an issue here. I was questioning the dogma, and the students that I had were going, are you a Christian? Because it doesn't sound like it. You don't sound like you're convinced anymore that this is true. And that's those kind of things would happen. And I'd walk away and think, okay, where am I at with this thing? Because I'm going to be in trouble here at some point. Someone's going to say, you can't teach anymore because clearly you don't believe this stuff. And you really need to believe it if you're going to be a teacher at a Bible college,
right?
In theory, or be a really good actor.
It's interesting because and I think mine and Gerette's experience, whenever we talk to anybody that was in a group, a cult, they always use those three words, I got out.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't like escaping from something because in my case, I'd left the church. I wasn't going to church anymore. I just walked away from all that, but I was still teaching, so it was a long process. It was several years later after we left the church that I finally said, I don't ever want to go back to any church. And in fact, when I saw the evangelical support for Trump in 2016, that was when I said, this is a clear breaking point. I no longer want to be associated with Christianity. I don't want to call myself a Christian. I am now clearly no longer a Christian. And that was a big moment for a lot of evangelicals at that point. I know for sure. I've heard that a lot.
That's really interesting. And I appreciate your describing the difference because a lot of the people that are following I Got Out on Instagram are deconstructionists. Mm-hmm. And just that, the way you clarified that just now of how it is a slower process and it's more of an ideology rather than a group.
It really is. I've written papers on this issue of, is evangelicalism a cult? And I have to step back and say, it can't be a cult because it's not a monolith. It's too big. There's not a single leader like a Keith Raniere or an L. Ron Hubbard or someone like that. It's a worldwide movement. But at the same time, many, many churches can be cult-like or be cults where you have obviously a dynamic pastor type figure who fits the classic cult leader model. So an individual church can absolutely be a cult that people need to escape. And they may be saying, yeah, I got out, which is interesting, isn't it? Because the point of the website, isn't it, where you can go on and anonymously share your story, whatever that story might be of how you got out. Isn't that the whole kind of aim of the site?
Well, it is. And we wanted to give people like myself who do want to be anonymous a way to have a voice. The other purpose of the website is basically to define what I Got Out, hashtag I Got Out, is about, and give an example of how you might be able to tell your story. Ideally, if the movement goes where I want it to, it'll get away from me. And I Got Out will be everybody's, just like hashtag Me Too was.
Right. Hopefully when it blows up.
Yeah.
So just as we're kind of wrapping it up, so how do people find this site? I think we might have mentioned the website address. If you want to go on the site and share your story, how do they get there? How do they find it?
Yeah, and I also would love to, if it's okay, is to share the mission statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
igotout.org. The mission is healing, education, and prevention. Those Those three concepts are our overarching credo.
Right, your core
Maybe
values.
I should use that word, value.
Yeah, core values sounds better.
Core value, thanks.
There you go. That works.
I was born Catholic. I do not identify as a Christian today, but sometimes things slip out.
It's baked in, isn't it?
Yeah, you know that phenomenon a little.
Oh,
huh?
absolutely.
Okay, the sole mission of #IGotOut is to inspire survivors of cultic abuse to tell and share their stories, creating an online community dedicated to unflinching honesty. We believe this simple but profound act is a catalyst for personal healing, as well as community education and prevention that corrects the many systemic misperceptions of cultic involvement. We also believe the collective potential of all of our stories will help steer society into a new day where abuse of power is not tolerated. We tell our stories and we change the world.
That's a great tagline at the end, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can literally change the world by telling your story. No matter how you don't have any Twitter followers, you're not as big as Stephen Hassan or someone else like that. But man, that's a huge statement, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and
it's every one of us.
Mm-hmm.
I want to also give just some pointers about how to become an activist in the movement. Because a lot of us that were in cults, we're not tech savvy. We don't really understand how all this stuff works. So just a few things that everybody can do is follow. If you're on Instagram, get on Instagram, follow hashtags. #IGotOut being one of them, but you can also find community in #exvangelical, #exmoonies,
X-cult,
and start to pay attention to people's stories. Follow people that are starting to tell their stories, comment on their stories, engage with people, start these conversations. So connect.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other thing that you can do is repost people's content to amplify people's stories. You can do this through the stories function on Instagram, on Twitter. You have the capability to retweet.
Mm-hmm.
And always use that #IGotOut when you communicate, because that ups the algorithm for the hashtag.
Mm-hmm.
Use it in your comment. And the other thing that's super important and what I've seen and how I've connected with people is when somebody tells their story, they're pouring their heart out to nobody on the internet unless they are acknowledged. So seeing them, let people know that you saw them, you heard their story. I get you.
#I see you.
Yeah, you're validated then, aren't you?
Validate people, because that's how we can grow this.
Mm-hmm.
When you validate somebody else's story, it gives somebody permission to A, tell more, B, it might crack them open to being able to tell their story too.
Mm-hmm.
And the act of telling your story and being heard is incredibly healing.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? That validation piece is absolutely massive, isn't it? Well, and I was going to say too, my good friend Janice Selby, she's hosting the conference on religious trauma coming up very soon.
Exactly.
And we're going to be, me and some friends are going to be on a panel. We're not the main headliners. I think Dr. Marlene Winnell's got a little bit more, things to say about RTS, but I'm excited to be a tiny little part of it. But yeah, you get involved in those kind of communities. You can join Facebook groups. You can do a lot of things, just like you said, in terms of social media. You may not be an activist per se, but you can get involved. I love what you said, Lisa. It's just real practical, simple things. But yeah, you can get involved, can't you?
Right.
Exactly. And if you are, that the conference on religious trauma is something that is really exciting to me too. And unfortunately, the timing is such that my book is coming out right at that time, and it's I'm not going to be able to make it. But it can also be intimidating to tell your stories. So we do, at I Got Out, we do offer an option for people who would like a little extra support. And that is a free kind of a one-time writing class that you can come to, what's called Writing to Reckon. And it's a class that I facilitate with just a small group of people. And we just help guide you through the process of writing your own personal I Got Out statement. And so it's a way of kind of creating a little bit more safety. It's totally confidential, small group. And we, just focus on that process of actually writing our own statement. So that's another option for people who would like a little extra.
It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful class. I've attended it a couple times, and it can be very cathartic, and at the same time, it's so supportive.
So even just getting the help to be able to put your story together, you're even offering that element of it as well. If you're saying, I don't even know if I can articulate my story, well, let's help you do that. That's great. I love the fact that you're offering such practical, simple tips, but ways for people to get involved. Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. So head over to igotout.org if you're interested in sharing your story or just reading other people's stories. I've read some of the stories on that. It's just incredibly powerful what I've read on there. So yes, it's a great site. So thank you so much. I love the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and kind of bring people up to speed. Let's hope that this I Got Out hashtag does blow up. Let's hope it goes. Let's go viral.
Let's go viral, babe.
There you go. Thank you so much, ladies. I've absolutely loved talking to you and meeting you both.
Thank you so much. Real pleasure. Delight to be with you today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Clint.